Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering No Weenies Allowed and Squilliam Returns. This is probably something I should save for the actual review segment or for my closing thoughts, but I can't hold my tongue. Does anyone else always mess up the title for Squilliam Returns? I always call it Squilliam's Return. Even in my written review, that typo is all over that thing. Anyway, let's see, opening thoughts. I suppose with these two episodes we've got a rather iconic episode plus an episode that people talk about a lot because of its association to band geeks, and the complete disappearance of Squilliam as a character. I don't really have any opening thoughts beyond that, so let me move on. As always, I just want to say thanks to everyone watching. I know I say it every time, and perhaps for some of y'all it interrupts the flow of things, but what can I say? I like my routine. And more importantly, I like giving my thanks to everyone who's been interested enough to watch my reviews. Now, let's just get right into it. Starting us off today is No Weenies Allowed, a pretty joke-filled episode. This is another one of those early meme spawning episodes, and by early, I mean early for meme standards. I remember being a kid and looking at those I'll have you know memes in horrible resolution, impact text and all. God, those were the days. I feel like we're kind of past the age of prime memes. I don't know. It doesn't feel the same anymore. Whatever, this has nothing to do with the episode, so let's begin for realsies. I like that No Weenies Allowed starts with Sandy and SpongeBob hanging out at the beach, followed by them sparring. It's fun to just see them hanging out like this. I feel like not very many episodes actually have a premise of the characters hanging out if you think about it, and I also just like seeing Sandy and SpongeBob have this shared activity in karate. It's always fun to see them have this thing that's just theirs. And of course, I can't go without mentioning the potato salad bit with my favorite background character, Tom. Yes, he actually is my favorite background character, I'm not joking. I love that SpongeBob analyzes Sandy's words as he's flying through the air as he's just gotten his butt kicked. That was just really funny. Honestly, thinking of it, SpongeBob really got his ass handed to him throughout this episode, but it never felt like too much, you know? No Weenies Allowed gets to the plot very quickly, which is always appreciated. Although, calling what goes on in this episode a plot is perhaps a little inaccurate. I'd say this is more a setup for a collection of jokes that we'll be seeing. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to imply that this episode is at all story-driven. It's a simple one. Through and through. It takes place in literally 2 locations outside of the very beginning. It's simple. Anyway, as SpongeBob and Sandy enter this new direction for the episode, I love that one of the guys thinks that SpongeBob is a piece of paper. That was just really funny to me. This episode is also full of great visuals, like when the guy shows that he has muscles on his eyeballs. Though, I'm with SpongeBob. That is pretty gross. Even Sandy looked concerned at that one. And then we get to the main driver of the episode, the bouncer of the Salty Spittoon, Reg. See, you gotta be tough to get into the Salty Spittoon. So before I get to the rest of the episode, I'm gonna ask y'all, what would y'all do to get into the Salty Spittoon? I'm gonna ask this in the comments too, because I want answers. Not to brag, but I got an A in organic chemistry, so I'm basically a VIP. If that don't get me in the Salty Spittoon, then maybe it ain't the place for me. And turning my attention back to the episode, I love the ways that we see all these people get into the place. Sandy shows her toughness immediately by literally ripping off Reg's tattoo, which is just so funny. Don't mess with the squirrel. Though, I suppose that was already established when she beat SpongeBob's ass at the beginning of the episode. The bulk of this episode is made up by SpongeBob's failed attempts at getting into the Salty Spittoon, and each one of these attempts is hilarious. My favorite is probably the first of these attempts, probably because of SpongeBob's I'll have you know and his try and fail at opening a ketchup bottle. Though honorable mention goes to him breaking his fingers by cracking his knuckles. I hate cracking any of my joints, though as long as I crack my fingers the way SpongeBob did, I'm actually fine. But doing it in the way where you have your hand in a fist, oh hell no, I hate doing that. So basically what I'm trying to say is I relate. As a location, I really love Weenie Hut Juniors because it's innately hilarious, and the way SpongeBob keeps being sent back there throughout the episode is just so funny. The poor sponge simply isn't built for that tough guy life. I love that the robot there keeps roasting him too, even when he's being helpful. The guy isn't a miracle worker after all. There's lots of little moments I like in this whole segment of the episode, like the fake SpongeBob, the tattoo, or even better when we immediately see how tough these people are when they immediately start throwing hands about presumed cutting in line. I also like how Patrick randomly appears in the episode, as he apparently is a frequenter of Weenie Hut Juniors, which then calls the Salty Spittoons, or maybe Weenie Hut Junior's entire mythos into question, because Patrick is for sure tough enough to get into the spittoon. We see this man commit feats of strength, like, all the time, but he'd rather hang out with the Weenies. That means something, I'm sure. Anyway, SpongeBob's fake fight with Patrick is extremely entertaining, not to mention a source of many, many memes. Old memes, anyway. I still very clearly remember a video of Patrick going Super Saiyan with the Super Saiyan 3 music behind it. And I actually managed to find it after all this time because I swear I couldn't find it for years. So that's conveniently located in the description for any of y'all curious. Anyway, I love how convincingly Patrick is able to kick his own butt, and it's all worth it once we see SpongeBob gain entrance into the salty spittoon. His proclamation that this is the happiest day of his life is adorable, and I love that even Reg looks proud. And it becomes hilarious once juxtaposed with the next shot of him in the ambulance. Poor guy slipped on an ice cube. And Sandy is a real one for coming to the hospital with him. The episode ends with a great zinger about Weenie Hut General, closing out this hilarious and well-crafted episode. I really enjoy No Weenies Allowed. I think it's a really funny episode that I have no problems with. I'm not really sure what the popular consensus about this episode is. No one really talks about it outside of the memes, so I can't tell if people really like it or just find it good. So I'll make the unfounded claim that it's underrated and say that people need to like it more. Whatever the case is, this episode has earned its spot in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. Coming up next, we've got Squilliam Returns, the episode that I was lamenting about mixing up the title for in the beginning. I love how this is the title of the episode given that Squilliam was introduced in one of the most popular and iconic episodes of the show, so people know him well. Makes me wonder though, did Band Geeks become popular immediately and that's why the title was like this? Cause it's not like we ever got a Plankton Returns or anything, cause if you remember, at this time Plankton wasn't a main character, so him returning would be a whole thing like Squilliam here. But maybe the episode title is also a nod to Squilliam's own self-importance. He's so egotistical that of course the second episode about him would be about his return. Or maybe it's not so deep, and I should move on to talking about the episode, right? I love how this episode begins, with Squidward counting down the seconds until he can leave, which is relatable, and then immediately going on a rant about how much he hates this job and looks forward to the day he can quit and move on with his life, because that's also relatable. Squilliam Returns wastes no time in giving us what was promised to us, which is Squilliam. Squidward runs into the guy immediately during his lunch break, and once again I find myself waxing poetic about how adult this show can be sometimes. And I don't mean that in a dirty jokes way, because there's more to being an adult-like show than that. This is still a show for children, after all. But what I mean here is Squidward's embarrassment about his life, especially when comparing it to Squilliam, is something that's relatable to adults, not necessarily children, who are still at the very, very beginning of this game we play called life. I know I'm supposed to be fighting the urge to over-explain myself, but I have to say that I don't actually consider life to be a game. I just wanted a good saying there. Moving on, this interaction is a little slow going, but it is funny, especially with the classic, "Oh no, he's hot." And then we get Squidward blurting out his blatant lie, which makes the audience both dread and anticipate what is to come, at least in my case. I love the face and reaction Squidward has to Squilliam's proclamation that they'll stop by his restaurant that night. I love how much this episode demands that audiences suspend their disbelief, given that there's no way anyone in that group of people hasn't heard of the Krusty Krab, especially once Squidward assumedly gives them the address of the place. Since the Krusty Krab isn't a chain, it's hard for me to think of an adequate comparison. I was going to say it's like not knowing what McDonald's is, but maybe that isn't accurate. It's like not knowing where the best pizza in town is. Just ludicrous. Oh, and also, by the way, fuck McDonald's. Anyway, but these are a bunch of rich, snobby folks, so perhaps they aren't in touch with the goings-on of cheap food. So maybe this does make sense after all. Anyway, I love how Mr. Krabs lets Squidward set up this whole charade. It once again subtly hints at a real friendship and companionship between the boss and employee, given that Mr. Krabs actually seems to want to stick up for Squidward here. Alternatively, he could be jealous of Squilliam's money, I suppose, and wants to take him down because of that, but I choose to believe in the wholesome version of events because it's more fun for me. Choose love, not war and all that. I just feel like the fact that Mr. Krabs knows who Squilliam is, or who Squidward's talking about, and knows about Squidward's rivalry with Squilliam implies that they've discussed this before. That's all I know. Squidward's ensuing preparation of the Krusty Krab is pretty entertaining, and I love how Patrick just shows up in this episode. He's really funny here, with this whole straightening out his life through the core thing. And he's also funny throughout this episode, such as his fighting with the coat hanger, or the whole appetizer debacle. I love everyone's enthusiasm with coming together to help Squidward out here. It's very reminiscent of Band Geeks. It seems that Squilliam is a problem that our characters continue to rally together for. SpongeBob is probably the standout in this episode, with his whole bit about becoming a waiter. The scene of the little SpongeBobs in his head is probably one of my favorite examples of the type of humor I love to see in SpongeBob. I love when they just deconstruct jokes randomly, especially because I too love to deconstruct jokes, though I guess I fall more into explaining jokes for no reason. Tomato tomato. Speaking of this episode being reminiscent to Band Geeks, we get a very similar setup to everyone getting their crap together in the last minute, as Squidward runs out the restaurant thinking everything is a disaster, and walks in with Squilliam seconds later mouth agape and stammering with the rest, because of the sheer quality of the ruse. At this point, it isn't even a ruse. SpongeBob really made the Krusty Krab into a 5-star restaurant. SpongeBob is just adorable as a devoted waiter, and he really is putting in the work, doing everything from the cooking, given Mr. Krabs and Patrick's being tied up by him, the cleaning, the seating, and of course, the waitering. It's just a very entertaining segment to watch as SpongeBob blows Squilliam away and Squidward gets a chance to gloat. Unlike Band Geeks, though, things don't end there for Squidward, because everything comes crashing down beautifully, with SpongeBob going crazy because he threw out everything in his mind except fine dining and breathing, and Patrick and Mr. Krabs coming loose with the appetizer. I love how Squilliam trolls Squidward at the very end, because it's almost convincing, and it always gets a good laugh out of me. The ending stinger with the world's smallest violin is hilarious too, and a great callback to the joke from earlier. Speaking of that gag, my parents and I do that to each other all the time, like rub our fingers together and play the world's smallest violin. It's just a funny little gag. It's also proof that despite what my parents, particularly my dad, say, they clearly have paid attention when I watch SpongeBob. So take that, Mom and Dad, I got you now. There really isn't anything else I can say about Squilliam Returns. I like this episode, and I've got no problems with it whatsoever. Maybe like one slow moment, but it hardly affects anything at all. And the episode isn't knockout hilarious, but it's pretty enjoyable and still funny. And unlike Band Geeks, this episode is not about Squidward getting catharsis and completely winning in the end. Perhaps that was a deliberate decision to differentiate this episode from Band Geeks. Maybe this episode is more representative of the typical SpongeBob SquarePants plot, since Squidward does not often get the win, especially when he's trying to one-up someone like this. But anyway, Squilliam Returns is a really great episode, so it's being put in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine, though I'm not sure I really have any. Neither No Weenies Allowed or Squilliam Returns is an episode that I think about very much or have a lot of thoughts about that don't necessarily belong in the review. I suppose I could go on a very long tangent about Squilliam and his lack of appearances in like a decade, but I don't really feel like doing that. I know he appeared in that Perch Perkins web series that clearly has been unceremoniously dropped by the SpongeBob YouTube channel for the time being. It's not the first time that has happened. Did anyone else watch their Bikini Bottom mystery series? I used to love that shit. Also, I just thought of this, but I can't believe I didn't go on a tangent during my review of No Weenies Allowed, talking about one of my favorite games of all time, SpongeBob's Truth or Square for the DS. Cause there was a mini-boss based on that episode. Wow, I can't believe I forgot about that. That's crazy. Alright, well, it seems like I'm all out of things to discuss, so I'm just gonna end the video here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.